A chief knowledge officer is kind of an interesting question you ask, because they didn't really know what it was when they hired me.
Hello everyone, welcome to Anatomy of Ed, the official Masters Union podcast. Today we have Professor Edward Rogers joining us. Professor Edward Rogers is a seasoned academician with teaching experience spanning multiple decades. He holds a PhD from Cornell University and has worked as a consultant with Procter Gamble in the past, and he's a seasoned veteran of NASA, having worked there as a Chief Knowledge Officer for 17 years. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking to him about various things, his experiences at NASA, what he's doing at Masters Union, the subject that he's teaching. So welcome to the podcast, Professor. You've had a very rich career. You worked with various organizations, both on the professional side and on the academic side as well. But a big part of that career has been with NASA. So let's start there. You spent 20 years at NASA as Chief Knowledge Officer. What exactly is the role of a Chief Knowledge Officer?
Well, I spent 17 years at Goddard Space Flight Center, which is one of NASA's centers. And at the center, I was the Chief Knowledge Officer for that center and worked for the director there. A Chief Knowledge Officer is kind of an interesting question you ask, because they didn't really know what it was when they hired me. And that was pretty obvious when I first started the job, because they asked me, what are you going to do now? But they kind of had a need for something in this area. And so at the time, back in early 2000s, knowledge officers, chief knowledge officers was becoming kind of a fad and a trend, hiring these people, another CO, CXX, kind of thing. And so it was an opportunity to come take a different look at the organization. So chief knowledge officers do somewhat different things depending on the way it's described. But my job, I had the opportunity to actually define for myself, because there was no definition for it.
That's ideal.
It was sort of an ideal opportunity, because I could see what I think really needs to be done, and then I could try to address that, rather than try to fill some slot or some expectation that some people had for what it should be. Many organizations, it may be just as simple as running a lessons learned database. You don't need a chief knowledge officer to do that. You need some IT person with a little bit of knowledge about what's happening. But a chief knowledge officer is really responsible to make sure that the knowledge of the organization is being utilized as efficiently and productively as possible, which includes how you do things, what you do, and what the results are.
Okay, so would you say that how organizations usually hire consultants sort of sometimes come in and make you see things in a very different perspective? You're kind of doing something very similar, but from within the organization, because you were helping them identify some of these gaps that may have existed across various verticals of the organization, different processes. So were you, in that sense, helping them identify these gaps and then figure out a plan that helps them fix these issues?
Yeah, that's a very insightful question. So you're really onto it, and that is a lot of part of what it is. For example, when I was being interviewed for the job, I asked the director, "Why don't you hire a consultant?" Because it sounds like the kind of thing you would hire a consultant to do, and and then you can just get a report and put it on your shelf. And I was actually interviewing him because I wanted to know if they were serious about this. Do they just want to do a consultant report and do a quick study and check a box and put it on the shelf, or are they actually interested in trying to get to the nubs and the bottom of this and really make it it's a lifetime, it's a career job? And so they convinced me. He said, "No, we want to work on this. We don't want just a report that nobody pays attention to and check a box." So I said, "Okay, now you convinced me. I'm willing to move my family and come here and take this job, because I don't want to just come here for 1 year, 2 years, and then it's a fad, it's worn off." But the other part of your part is also very insightful, that I ended up being really an advisor to the senior leadership, the project leaders, the director of the center, and his reports, in terms of learning the things what actually went on, what happened, why did this go so well, why did it not go so well, what did we miss, what should we have paid attention to here, and construct those into lessons that people could actually learn from.
What was some of the personal impact you created at the organization while you were there, and also some of the learnings that you took from the organization?
So let me start with the learnings first. One of the first things I learned was, you have to adapt to the way people think and the way they already solve problems. I mean, people at NASA are really smart, right? It goes without saying. They're obviously very smart people, and they're very good at what they do. But they had some challenges. And I had to identify those challenges, and I had to be able to describe them in ways that made sense to them, using so the first thing I did was jettison all my academic jargon. I'd written papers and published things and given waxed eloquent in speeches. They didn't care about any of that stuff. It doesn't mean anything to them. They're doing a job. They're building a satellite. They're building a mission, constructing a project. They need things and words that actually make sense to what they're doing. So then as far as the impacts of what I did, I tried to help people learn how to actually learn from their own projects. Because they go through their missions, they go through the projects. Some things work, some things don't work, some things are tough. There's some challenges, setbacks, maybe some cost overruns, delays, some things that happen that are unexpected. What can we actually learn from that? What did we actually do here? And what do we need to change in the way we think or the way we operate so that we can minimize or mitigate those kinds of risks from happening again? Because a lot of that stuff gets shoved under the rug as it was complicated, or we didn't get along with the other team, or those people didn't work together well. Some kind of generic cover-all statement, and there's not really much learning from that. So I think I got their attention in the regard that they began to believe that it's actually possible to get meaningful lessons from this fuzzy side of projects.
Fair enough. And what would you say would be the core skills that a chief knowledge officer would need to have? Because again, this is, like you said, it's a very unique designation. A lot of organizations still don't know, even if they bring a chief knowledge officer, how can they best make use out of that person? So what are the kind of skills you would be looking for in a person who's taking forward a role like that?
Well, let me differentiate between what people call a chief knowledge officer and someone who's like a lessons learned person or a person in charge of lessons learned for the company.
Yeah.
Those are more of a function that you can do, and you can hire somebody with the proper skills to manage that system, which is generally looked at as being a system, usually an IT kind of system that supports it. A chief knowledge officer has really got to be part of the thinking part of the leadership. And you don't always need a chief knowledge officer, but if your organization does, it's someone who should be able to think in terms of the strategic directions of the company, not make those decisions. They're not necessarily part of that strategic decision-making body, but understand where the organization is going and what are the things that might be holding them back in the way we organize and manage ourselves. And what can we learn from that? Because we do these projects over and over again. So let me give you an example. One of the first things I learned is, and I expressed this to people, and they actually believed me, is NASA does not, their business is not space missions. Their business. Their business is making project teams. A project team executes a space mission. But what NASA builds over and over again as a product is a mission project team. They build a team, and that team executes a mission. Then they'll build another team, and that team will execute a mission. So you have to be good at building project mission teams. That's the business they're in, if you look at it from that sense of the word.
If I have to ask you to recollect, some of these instances that come in mind wherein you could apply a lot of these learnings, just if you could share an instance or two.
So, yeah, there's lots of stories. They're good guys. They're great people.
I'm sure.
To work with. And I would say, by far the mass majority of them are very eager to learn. So one of the things I learned was they're not necessarily opposed to the things I might be bringing up as knowledge management things or things the chief knowledge officer does, writing case studies, trying to extract lessons, trying to understand how this project actually worked, what didn't work, why we went off the rails or whatever. Part of their belief is there's nothing that can be done about it because that's kind of the way it is. It's either that's the government, that's the nature of complex space projects. These are new things. Nobody knows what you're doing. We haven't done this before. It's new. It's always something new. And it's hard. It's not easy work to do, to figure out how to send a satellite or mission to go rendezvous with a comet, pick up some material and bring it back to the Earth. You have no idea how complicated that is. Sure. But they can figure that out. And then you start talking about, well, how do we conduct a team meeting? Yeah, I'll give you one interesting example, right? So this team was working on a very hard mission for a while, so really doing well. They were struggling, and they were really meeting the challenge. They're doing well. So the sponsoring executive, in other words, the top executive from headquarters, came out to the center to meet with the team. It was a good thing. He came out to encourage them. He wanted to show some, executive time with the team, this is important what you're doing, and just listen to them. That's a great thing. So they had a meeting, staff meeting, and the whole team came. They dressed their best, like you're all dressed up, and they sat there and they all reported their position. They usually do it every week. They reported in front of the senior executive sitting in their staff meeting. At the end of the staff meeting, after an hour and a half, they all stood up and it was silence. Now what do we do? Wow. So I went over to the executive, who I knew very well, and I said to his ear, quietly, go stand by the door and shake each person's hand when they leave. He said, okay. He went over to the door and he stood there, and the whole team lined up one by one. They all wanted to shake his hand. And he said thank you personally to each one. Now, that's not rocket science,
Of course.
but they had no clue. They had no clue what to do next. They had done a good thing. They didn't know how to bring it home. It is a very small thing, but I just show you the kind of things that are not deep necessarily things, but small things that make a big difference in the way they operate and the way they learn, and they learn how to build their teams better.
No, so like you said in the beginning, sometimes when you're so involved in your work, you can lose sight of the little things. And maybe in those situations, you just need a person like yourself to help them see light of these facts.
Yeah, see a few of just a little different angle, the way they don't think about it that way. They're thinking technical solutions, and there's another side to
Of course.
there's another side to it.
So let's move on to Masters Union. At Masters Union, you're teaching a subject, the Art of Managing Complexities. Let's start there. Like, how has the experience been so far at Masters Union?
The experience with the students,
Yeah, in general, the students,
great.
The campus, everything about Masters Union.
So Masters Union, has a feel of a startup almost about it. I mean, it is a startup. So that's not surprising.
Technically, yes.
Technically, it's relatively new. As far as universities go that are hundreds of years old, right? I mean, so it's a new university, a new college, a new academic place, and so it has that feel, which is great. So I was looking forward to the idea of coming where there's going to be a lot of energy. Things are new. It's a new opportunity to try something. It's also a little different kind of student. There's a bit of a different angle, they did in recruiting the students here, with a little bit of technical focus, a little bit of young focus, a little bit of energy focus. Who wants something a little bit different maybe than the standard book, MBA kind of package. So it's an experiment. And that was interesting to me, and I think I found it to be quite an interesting experiment.
Okay, but you've already sort of touched upon it, but I want to go on it a little bit further. What are some of the differences that you've seen between us and some of the other colleges that you've taught? Not just in India, but of course you've been teaching in the United States as well for a long time. What are the differences that you see between what we're trying to build here versus what currently exists out there?
Well, I see an interesting effort being made to help the students really practice what they're doing. Now, I always believed in this in my class. You're taking my class. What I teach something for an hour, and then I make you practice it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you don't practice it, you don't know how to do it. I mean, worse, you don't even think you can do it if you haven't actually tried it. And so, getting hands-on projects for the students in the program like Masters Union has here, I think not only teaches students how to run small businesses, do small projects, address entrepreneurial ideas like you're doing, it also helps build the confidence that, we did it in class, I can do this also. Exactly. I mean, I worked with a space startup called Dhruva Space in Hyderabad. Those guys were students who built a student project satellite in school, in engineering school. And they got convinced, hey, we could build a small satellite in school, why can't we build it for real? So they went and did a startup. It's the same process here. If you can do it for practice, maybe you could actually go do it for real. And it convinces them. I think those are both almost equally as important, knowing how to do it and knowing that you can do it.
Of course, and and Masters Union has been very true to that mission since the beginning. We don't want to be like a typical B school wherein we're getting people in and preparing just for that managerial role or that leadership role in the future. We want to make sure that entrepreneurship is something that we encourage from the very beginning in our students. But moving on, of course, when you're trying to build something different, it comes in with its own set of advantages and its own set of challenges as well. So what are some of the advantages that you see for Masters Union, and what are some of the challenges that you see for us that may lie ahead?
Well, any startup that comes into a new space, right, that there's an existing space, but maybe there's some corners, let's say, left in that space that aren't used. You have the opportunity to go there where other people have been already boxed in, so to speak, defined by the rules. And so you can experiment. So I love the way Masters Union is experimenting, saying, let's try this, let's just go for it, and see how the students respond and see how the market responds and the placements. Of course, it's new, right? So there's not a long history yet. It'll come with time. And that's always creates an amount of energy and an excitement around it. And so I think it's good to see them exploiting those corners, not rushing to trim everything down and look exactly like everybody else and package themselves up to be identical to every other academic, type institution, every other B school, so to speak. The challenges would be those pressures are there. There are conforming pressures, like if you want to get along or you don't want people to, criticize you, or they might say something about you like, you don't have such and such and such and such. And those pressures are there, and they might be overwhelming to force you end up looking just like everybody else. So that's always a balance that has to be maintained, and that requires really good leadership. Because good leadership needs to look ahead and see, yes, we might change this thing here to reduce one amount of criticism, but does it change our trajectory more than we want to?
Precisely.
Does it change the direction of where we're actually going? So good leadership with a good vision will help you reach your real goals. And I think that's what they've started off with here.
But moving on, we'll move on to talk about the subject that you're teaching here, the art of managing complexities. If you could just define what are some of these complexities, and at the same time, why call it art? I mean, we're in a space wherein everybody says that if you got to solve these complex problems, you have to take all the data and sort of crunch those numbers and then come to the right sort of answer. But you specifically use the word art. So I want you to dwell more on that why call it an art and not science?
So there's complexity in all kinds of things. There's complexity in numbers. There's complexity in the universe. There's complexity in technology, things we build. There's complexity in humans, especially human relationships.
Exactly.
So these things all come to a nexus when you build a company because it's built of technology, things that are real in the real world, and human relationships that come into that organization. And so you have to deal with all of those in a mix. And the reason I called it art is because we're pretty good at the other side of things. We're learning a lot more. The algorithms for sorting through millions and millions of bits of data, right? So we have ways to do that now and sort them through, and Google can tell you exactly what you did last week, what you didn't do, what you should do next week.
Sure.
But how do we know what people are thinking and what they're doing in the organization? How do we know if my team is strong enough to withstand the crisis that's coming around the corner? You don't know that. And you don't want to end up like the Everest team that got up to halfway up the top of Everest and their team fell apart.
Sure.
They didn't build a foundation that would get them through the crisis they need to get through. And one of the reasons is those complexities are hard because they're difficult to work with. They're difficult for a number of reasons. They're difficult to understand and see in the first place because they're hidden. They're hidden for what's in people's minds and hearts, and they're not always shared. And you only see the interactions between them on the surface. You don't know what's inside. So that's one. Two, these things are often the kind of problems that interact with other parts of the problem in the company. So they're not isolated. You can't solve them in a piecemeal type of a way, in a sense that you can go in and solve a mechanical problem, fix the tire, then fix the engine, then fix the exhaust, then fix, they're not independent ideas like that. They're intertwined, and that requires understanding how they're intertwined in order to actually go ahead and fix them. And so it's an art more because it requires this ability to think about things, not just put an algorithm to solve a problem. There is no formula that you're going to put in place to say, my team is dysfunctional, not working very well. People are not being committed. We're not achieving the results we wanted in our organization. We have all the smart people on board, but they're not working together. What do we do about that? So I'll give you an example. Every organization has, NASA's no different. They have technical division, right? The engineering division,
of course,
the project management group, the HR group, the safety group, the IT group, all these departments have their thing. How do you get them to work together productively, maximally? Well, that's a universal challenge of corporations or companies, organizations all over the world. That's no different. But there's no science that tells you if you do A, B, and C, you'll get result D, E, F. They say if you do a whole bunch of things between A and J, you'll get some results between, P and Z. It's kind of more of a directionality thing rather than a guaranteed one-to-one result. And that's why it's more of an art, because you're like painting a picture.
So it's the kind of uncertainties that exist. It's making you think about the things that don't necessarily make you feel comfortable. You want to avoid these kind of subjects, especially when you're dealing with inner team dynamics and trying to figure out that why did a project not exactly give out the kind of result that we initially hoped for or desired.
Right. So engineers typically look at a project that didn't go so well. They want to find the loose bolt. I used to use this term all the time in NASA. Where's the loose bolt, right? So we found the loose bolt. That's what came loose. That's what wrecked the car, right? But organizational projects aren't that way. There's no loose bolt. You can't say, well, George was the loose bolt. We fired him and everything worked fine. Because we fired George, we still had all the same problems. So there's not a loose bolt that you just tighten the bolt up and everything works fine now. It's like the whole thing is shaking.
That's very insightful. But I want to talk to you about some of the subjects we've again covered in the classroom, and we've talked about effective communication and communication channels. But when you look at some of these things, they seem so obvious on the surface, and yet it feels like, why haven't organizations cracked this? Why have we not figured out a way to solve some of these problems? It's something that's right there, and sometimes it's so obvious that we don't even need someone from the outside to come tell us about these things. But it still happens to this day, and it happens across. I'm sure you may have had a slightly different experience working with startups maybe, or startups or businesses in, say, US, but it happens in India as well. Why do you think that's still the case?
That's the human complexity, see? Because you can't figure it out perfectly. So I'll give you an example. It happened with me. I worked with a project that spanned across 2 US government agencies.
Wow.
So I was tasked with helping them work better together. No different than what you just described, only on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
I had numerous people tell me that's an impossible to solve problem. Now, the people who were telling me that were building satellites to go to Mars, missions to go into outer space, circle the sun, measure the weather around the Earth 24/7, all kinds of things that I would think are probably pretty hard to do. But they said, that job is impossible. So I didn't solve it completely, but that I made significant progress working on it for a couple of years shocked a lot of people. Not because I'm a genius, this happens to be my field. They're good in their field, but they don't think it's actually possible. And that's one of the reasons you were asked why we let it go on and on. We don't think any progress is possible because we don't have the tools or the insights to know what to do about it. So I used to use this illustration. You're building a satellite, you're an engineer who's built a $200 million satellite, and it's mostly built, but there's something not quite right with it. Would you let me, a PhD in management, with a screwdriver, stick it inside there and sort of bang around and see if I can fix it?
Not really.
Like, kick the TV, see if I can get it to work, function or something, right? Just bang the side of the... Of course not.
Of course.
Because I don't understand how it's built, and I might do more damage than I actually do good. So why would you take a software engineer and ask him to fix your organizational team? He's going to stick a screwdriver in there and shake it around and beat people and maybe have no result or worse result. Exactly. You just need the proper tool and the proper understanding, and you can work on it. And so I showed them that you can do that. There's methodical ways to actually improve building teams, improve building relationships, and build sounder, more sure footings so you'll get more chances of success, which is what they want. They're eager to succeed. They love their work. So once they see that you're actually helping them, they're actually eager to take what I was trying to show them how to do. They weren't pushing it back. I had a lot of requests for help.
So that brings me to the next question. In our classroom, we've covered a lot of models. And I want to understand, businesses have so many uncertainties sometimes that you highlight some of these models to managers and they're quick to dismiss this stuff. They don't want to go and look at models when you're in the middle of a crisis situation. And generally the attitude is that the problem and the solution to these kind of problems can be figured out in a boardroom where everyone comes together and they just figure out that kind of stuff. So how do you think that you can make managers more cognizant of the fact that how essential these models are to improving their decision-making process?
So that's a great question, and actually was very relevant to the kind of work I was doing at NASA for many years, as we talked about. And so I had to demonstrate to them the value. That was on me. You'll get their attention for a short while, right? They'll give you some courtesy time, but if it's not showing any value, it's adios. And so I would make models of projects and how they were managed and what went on, and I would show them to them. I would make them myself. And I would take them to these meetings and I'd say, this is what's going on. And they would look at it and they'd say, yeah, that's why we feel frustrated. This is why they would see how these things are all related and connected. Complicated stories, many players and things happening. Because I would go around and research all this and build these models as the chief knowledge officer, and then present to them, and they would see that there's many pieces to the puzzle. So I'll give you a quick example. Some organizations are having some vertical issues, between verticals. So I went to one of the groups and I talked to them about, what do you think about this other vertical? This other operation.
How nice were the answers?
Yeah, they were actually very nice.
Oh.
Yeah. So I went to the other group and I said, what do you think about them? And they said, yeah, they're very, so this is like, think of it like safety and engineering, for example, or something like project and engineering, whatever, typical groups in a company. And they described them, yeah, they're essential. They do an important part of the organization. We can't do without them. They're smart people, blah, blah, blah. And all these, some details are there. And then I showed them to each other. I said, you actually like each other pretty much, right? But you don't behave that way.
Yeah.
So why don't you just get this comfortable and start talking? So I created some conversations between them, and they got a little more comfortable and realized, oh, these guys are not my enemies. They knew that, but they just don't take time. They just keep pushing with their work. right? Everyone's focused, everyone's nose is down, everyone's working hard, late hours. I mean, these are people who are dedicated to their work. So giving them a little, what I needed to show was you could spend an hour or two, and that hour or two would be productive. You would actually produce results of a better organization, a better team, better functioning, better getting along, better answers, better ways to solve the problems they're already working on, not some diversion. Take half day, go off and do some retreat and study some meaningless thing, make paper airplanes, make paper chains, do ropes or jump up and down or play games and come back and be exactly the same as when we left. So that was the challenge I had. And I had to show them that you could do that in an hour or two. And that would be useful. Then they signed up.
That's pretty good. But I want to understand, do you really, and I want to stress on this as well, because a lot of people might just disagree that you can't really change your behavior and your decision-making process because it's something that's so intrinsic. It's something that's so intuitive at times. And again, it's influenced by things that you see and your surroundings, but it's not something that you can change by, going through a textbook or reading about case studies or models. What would you say to those people?
So you can't change what you don't understand and don't see. That's a fairly true statement because you don't know what it is. So if you don't understand your own models that you're using, you're unlikely to be willing to change them. You accept them as givens.
Yeah.
But because you've accepted them as a given doesn't mean they're unchangeable.
Okay.
You need to change your opinion that they're unchangeable. And that takes some humility, realizing other people have ideas too, which is part of the whole thing behind diversity, right?
Of course.
Diversity of ideas is you don't have all the ideas. You may have some, but you don't have all the ideas. You may even have the best ideas, but there's still other ideas that make it better. And so you get them thinking, and these models that we create an opportunity to see your thinking, which enables you to entertain the idea that there's a better way of thinking. When you just see it straightforward, black and white, this is working and I'm fine, I don't need to change, and you convince yourself of change. If you convince yourself that you don't need to change, why would I expect to change it? You've already convinced yourself.
I agree with the thought because we've been in 4 sessions so far, and I've really enjoyed the classroom sessions. So it's definitely made me think about things that I thought that, do I even want to go and think about those things, especially with the models that we build about our own personal lives. It's definitely been a great experience. But I want to talk about the fact that for a lot of people, in the classroom sessions that you take, the learning may be a little bit more delayed, where it's not something where you you have an immediate takeaway from the course. You go out and you finish the classroom sessions, and then maybe when you start to work, it sort of hits in 2 years later when you're in a crisis situation. I remember doing the Vasa case study in the classroom, and it's very similar to that situation. Mm-hmm. So the realization kicks in very late. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you've experienced in your past classroom assignments and sessions that you've taken?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of students write to me over the years that things came to them years later. I still have students who've been out 4, 5, 10 years who once in a while drop me a line, something came along. But that's also my plan. So if that's working, then I'm very happy. Because my plan is I don't want to teach students how to pass the course.
Yeah.
I want to teach students how to pass life. And life has challenges. So my grade doesn't matter at all in 6 months or 10 months, doesn't matter much at all. In fact, what matters is how you think about your own life and what you do with it. And if you can do better with it, 10%, 20%, 5%, then that's something. That's a significant difference. So teaching people how to grow and learn themselves and be in charge of their own learning really opens up huge possibilities and potential for folks.
Perfect. And now that you've touched upon the students, do you have any particular instances of a student who may have reached out to you years after, or maybe immediately after the course finished as well, about how much of an impact the course had on them?
Well, as you shared briefly, we haven't finished the course yet. There's more to come.
Sure. There will be.
And there's more difficult things to come. Because we got to get into the meat of it, right? So the course gives you the opportunity to learn how to do it slowly. Yeah. One shock at a time. You don't just wire up the wires and shock them completely once. They might kill them. So you give them a little bit at a time. And then they learn and they start to see how the pieces fit together. And some of that happens when students leave. As you said, they keep thinking about it. They keep understanding more where it fits. And they see examples. They see like, this does remind me of something we studied. Hopefully, it also comes to mind, not only it reminds them of the situation, but also, and I could do something about it. And that's what's important. So, when I took the job at NASA, there was no job. That was a new position. There was no given what you're supposed to do. There was no set of things to take over and operate. There was no staff, who you run and are doing all these activities. In fact, the person who hired me, the director, asked me, what are you going to do? He had no idea. They just hired me because I had a degree and credentials in something they knew they needed. And that's actually the kind of model they have. We need someone who knows how to do X or Y or Z. We don't know how to do that. We may be really good at building this. We need someone who knows how to build solar arrays. So they'll go get the solar array expert, not assume that we can do everything. They'll get the expert needed for the task at hand, and they recognize they needed some expertise, at least, in this area in which they were not good. And so they hired an expert to come in and help them. That's a tremendous opportunity. I mean, I was really blessed to get that kind of opportunity in that kind of organization with those kind of people for that many years. That's why I was very happy to finish my time there and say, I've done my part.
You touched upon a very interesting subject about how the director wasn't even sure. They identified that there was a need of an individual like that, but they weren't sure how much of a difference how the role was going to be structured as. Do you think organizations in today's time sort of go the opposite way, where even before they've brought in people for a certain role, they have defined everything to the last bit, and then we're not sort of leaving any room for creativity for the person to come in and sort of maybe just try something else? Is that something that you see happens a lot in today's organizations?
It does happen a lot because there's pressure to, produce and meet results and show value. Like you hired this person, you created a position. What's the value? What's their job position post giving back to the company in ROI or something like that? Yeah. Chief knowledge officer. No one looked and asked me. So I'll give you a funny story. So one time I was talking with the deputy director and I was telling him what happened today. I just chatted with him in the hallway, and he said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I got a call from headquarters, so the big boss, right? They wanted X, Y, and Z. I explained to them that was not a sensible thing to request, and it would probably not be useful, and so they canceled the order." He told me, "You probably earned your annual salary in this morning. By the time you saved all our project managers, wasted time and effort to answer this question that might have come to them, you probably saved your entire annual salary." So how do you don't, so they weren't looking to value on, immediate product return, boost in sales, that kind of thing. They knew it was more complicated than that. And this is just one example of something that came along that was a concrete example of something, that saved some time and money by having a good answer for it, by intercepting that, rather than having that unnecessary activity thrust upon all these people. Not well thought out answer. And that's fine. That happens in any organization. Headquarters makes demands and requirements, and there should be somebody sort of filtering those things to help them out. So those kind of things help the organization to some degree. But a lot of organizations are looking a little too much for the, what's the ROI on this position? Yeah. Did he save us from 3 mistakes? Well, how would you know that? Did he boost our sales by 10%? No, you need to understand the nature of the work, how it fits in with helping the organization. That's the art side, right? How it fits in with helping the organization be a better, stronger organization. And then you make the assessment, that's really worthwhile. And so it has to be that kind of, what I used to do was I used to ask the project managers. So this is what I told my boss after I was there. First year I was there, he asked me, what are you going to do in your first year's goals? Like, you need performance goals. Okay. Well, what are you going to do for knowledge management? Chief knowledge officer, what's your performance goal? So I told him 2 things. There's 7 director and 6 direct reports. I said, they'll all know me on a first name basis. He said, okay. Number 2, I said, project managers, who are the kings in NASA, they run the projects, right? They're the heads of all the projects. Project managers will call me and ask for assistance. Well, now these were both sort of out there. Big goals, because nobody knows all the directors on a first name basis, except the director probably, right? A few people at the top. And by the way, project managers never call for the assistance from quality or safety or human resource if they don't need it, right? Yeah. They don't call over and say, just send over some extra people to my team to kind of muck up things. But they did. I went to him and I went to his office before the year's out and I said, you tell me all the directors, do any of them not know me on a first name basis? He goes, no, you're right. They all know you. Because I've put my fingers in all the projects and made a difference. So they know me. Not in a sense I want to get rid of you. They know me as like, if they see me coming, they'll talk to me. Sure. And project manager, I took them emails of a project manager called me up and said, I need you to come help me with my project. That must be a good feeling. So that was a good feeling. But I made those up on the spot. It was a little risky. But still, it paid off. It paid off. But I'm also willing to take risks, and I thought they were serious, so I was serious about going all in. So before we move on to some of the fun stuff, I just have one question because
you've had, again, a very diverse career because you started in agronomy and then you moved on to international business and then you moved on to human resource management, someone in that space, and then you ended up as chief knowledge officer at NASA. What were some of the challenges associated? Because a lot of people who are here at Masters Union as well, for them, they would love to listen to that answer because we're in a space wherein we may have had careers in one particular vertical, and now we're strictly looking to jump industries. Someone is maybe coming in as a consultant, but now wants to move on to marketing, or the other way around. What was the challenge like, and how did you sort of navigate through that process?
So I could tell you a nice story of how I strategically planned my life and made very smart choices and had all the things worked out in advance and was in complete control of everything, but that wouldn't be true. But it would sound nice, but it wouldn't help you either. A lot of those choices were made. There were some that we made very intentionally. So my wife and I, when we first got married, we wanted to go give back. We were very committed to go helping people. That's what we wanted to do. So we went off to Lebanon to be missionaries for 5 years, helping people in the war.
Wow.
And we helped the most bombed out people. And I mean, but it's a wonderful experience. I wouldn't change it for anything. I mean, it was the most satisfying, part of years of my life. But it was crazy. I mean, people were killed and our colleagues were shot. People were blown up. People were kidnapped. People I knew and worked with, they didn't come back the next day. Their legs are blown off. I mean, it was a horrible situation, but you're making some difference. I don't think there isn't a person alive who doesn't want to make a difference if they can. And because I was looked at it as I was given an opportunity to make a difference, and I think all I did was step up to it. But we were evacuated. We were kicked out. So I ended up in the U.S., penniless, jobless, and no skills. I mean, I can hand out blankets. I learned how to hang out blankets. That was my skill. Like, what am I doing? Drive a truck. So I had to make some choices. So all of these choices were thrust upon us. So my brother advised me to go get an MBA. He said, why don't you go get an MBA? And what he said is, I think you're good at solving problems, Ed. You seem to be good at solving problems. My father was a physicist. Yeah. He used to always teach us to solve problems and figure things out. So if something's broken, a toy's broken, he'd get down and take it apart and help us figure out how to fix it, not just go buy a new one. So we learned from an early age, you can fix things.
Yeah.
So we have this problem-solving attack on life. And so I thank him for that. And so I did. I went to get an MBA. I loved it. I had never studied any business. As you said, my undergrad degree was in agriculture.
Yeah.
That was interesting to me. And I majored in Arabic. I studied Arabic language and agriculture. But, so what? Then I went off and did business. I found it fascinating. Then I went off and I was an older student at the time when I got my MBA. So all my classmates got placed. I got no placement.
So what happened?
So I went off and did consulting. Isn't that what you do when you're consulting when you don't get a placement? It was a really bad year. It was also, the economy was down. The jobs were really bad in general.
This is around 1990, right?
Yeah, 1991.
1991.
Yeah, 1991. So it was a really bad year. The market was way off.
Yeah.
And so, I was the marginal person, the bit older student and stuff like that. And so I didn't get an offer after my MBA. But okay, so I went and did something else. So I went and did consulting. I ended up consulting with senior people at Procter Gamble.
Wow.
Yeah. So, how did that happen? Well, you do what's in front of you. I did some menial things. I did some other things. I found some work, and you get an opportunity. And if you're ready for it, opportunity comes to those who are looking and those who are moving. I do believe that. I never stopped moving, even though there were some obstacles put in my way or some blocks and said, you can't go straight, you can go left or right. So I don't sit there and didn't scratch my head. Said, I'll go left. And you move. And so you move ahead and you make the best of it.
And the person who didn't get placement in 1991, 10 years later, would find himself with a job as Chief Knowledge Officer at NASA.
Absolutely.
So it all worked out.
It works out.
It worked out very well. And we're glad to have you here with us today as well. So now let's talk about the more fun aspects, because we've had a lot of discussion about Masters Union, the course, and this thing. I want to get to know you better as a person, and for our audience to get to know you better as a person.
Sure.
I know music's played a very, very important role in your life. You play 3 instruments, if I'm not wrong. You play the guitar, you play piano as well, and of course, you learned to play saxophone at 58. Where did this love exactly come from? And did this love for music sort of help you in your professional pursuits as well?
So that belongs to my parents. They're both musicians.
Oh.
They performed in orchestra, violin and cello, and music was always an important part of our family. Musical, singing, just not professional, like in plays and not necessarily, but always fun. It was always a part of the family. We loved to sing and do things, and so I always loved music. I didn't have a bad musical aptitude. I'm not a genius, natural super talent or anything like that, but good enough to get along. I did study some as a young, child, but I didn't pursue any of them really very strongly. In high school, I learned how to play classical guitar. So I studied very, very ferociously and performed classical guitar when I finished high school. I was performing classical guitar pieces at that level, But I went off to college and didn't even have a guitar, so it took a back seat. And so I passed along and I sang. I sang a lot in church, things like that, just for social reasons and stuff. And then I later learned to play an accordion.
Oh.
Just again, hacking around, And I play for my kids, my grandkids now. They like that. They like playing around, being silly. And then I learned to play piano on my own along the way, just sitting down and playing every day for a few minutes.
Beyond just music, travel has been something that's been very important to you. I think you grew up in Saudi Arabia, and you had your high school in India as well. Where was that exactly coming in from? Was it family that was taking you places? And even since then, how important has travel been to you?
So I've always enjoyed traveling. My family traveled ever since I was 8 years old. As you said, we moved from U.S. in 1966 to Saudi Arabia. And my parents lived there for about a dozen years. Wow. So I basically grew up there as a young child in the local school. It was an American school for the expats,
Yeah.
And then high school time, I was sent to boarding school, as you said, in Kodaikanal, in southern India, which was just wonderful. I mean, explore the country. We used to ride trains all over the countryside, take trips to Cochin in Bangalore, Madurai, Trincomalee, all these places. We visited all these places.
So you must have some great travel stories from India.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of good stories. I mean, right? We used to always. So when we used to book trains, we used to try to book the steam engine trains, even if they're slower, even if they took 24 hours. We just sit on the train. We used to have lots of fun because we're just going for the journey. So you ride around on a steam engine train in third class for a couple of days. You kind of feel like Gandhi's experience. You really saw India.
Oh. But I'm sure with these experiences in India as well, and you've been in India a lot, you've been here a lot of times.
Yes.
You've had a lot of exposure to Indian cinema as well, Bollywood, and I know it's kind of been a dream of yours to be in a Bollywood movie someday. So what's your favorite Bollywood movie? And when did you first get sort of exposure to Indian cinema?
Well, we watched movies when we were in high school, right, in the 70s. Of course, that time it was Zeenat Aman and all these other, she was big in Hari Krishna, Hari Rama and other movies like that in those days. I don't remember too many of them, but we saw those kind of movies back in those days. We didn't understand all of them very much, the language as much, but you could follow along what's happening.
Yeah.
But I've always enjoyed watching different Bollywood movies. Obviously, watching a lot of SRK's movies and things like that. And my wife and I like to watch Bride and Prejudice, those Aishwarya Rai's movies. It's so good. I mean, they're so funny. They have a really good take on life, and they're light. They have a lightness about the humor of laugh at ourselves in our silliness. And I showed some clips from Three Idiots in the classroom, and from Munabai and from other films. There's interesting watching Bollywood move from just making films about sort of fantasy life that people don't have but wish they had, which is okay. Films do that for us. It fills a need. Every human has a need for dreaming big, but also taking movies about what the life actually we do have and what its reality is. Sort of more commentary, And there's been a shift over the last decade or two of Bollywood moving in that direction, and that's been really interesting to watch and see. And I think it's been very healthy to bring a lot of discussions and commentaries, and like the movie about toilet. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they would not have made that movie 20 years ago at all.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but
that was a commercial success.
It was a very good commercial success. Yeah, or Padman. Exactly. So these are topics that are useful topics to get on the table because we want to fix them, and that's good. And so that means they become more fixable once they become okay to talk about, and that Bollywood's helping.
So I want to talk to you about your family a bit. Your parents were academicians. Your father was a physics professor. Mother was a high school teacher. How much of an influence did that have on you? Did that sort of drive you towards becoming an academician yourself? Or was it a separate choice influenced by some other factors?
So my father was a physics professor all his life. My mother taught grade school, actually, not high school. First and second, third grade, like that. So it did have an impact. The first impact it had is I never wanted to be a teacher. But that's just kind of the rebellious thing, of young youth growing up. You don't want to be like your parents. You want to be like them. You don't want to be like them. It changes. Later in life, I realized I actually, as I mentioned, I learned a lot, from my father in terms of being problem solving. Like his approach to the world was it's a problem, a puzzle to be figured out. And part of life is figuring it out. And that's the challenge. And that kind of is a fun game of things. So it kind of became, in fact, my motto for life is anything can be a game. And of course, my PhD was on game theory, right? So
Yeah.
explain this. Anything can be a game. Because if you make it a game like Mary Poppins, right, then it's
Yeah.
more fun. You're doing the same task, but now it's a game. And so I think I did learn those innately from them, inherently from them. Even though I didn't want to grow up and become a teacher, professor, I didn't have that ambition. It kind of just happened. After I got my PhD, you teach. That's what you do, you're faculty, right? And I realized I actually like teaching students. And my professors at university told me, you're at risk of not receiving tenure. You know that. Because if you like the students too much, then you won't focus on your research sufficiently. And so I had to think about that for a few years. And I finally realized, I really do like teaching. And so I took another job. I went to NASA. And I kept my academics up on the side, teaching on the side, because I like doing that.
Sure. And at some point of time when you were taking this decision, like before you went for your PhD, was this something in the back of your mind as well that you wanted to teach at the end of it? Or did
No.
you have different ambitions before you went for your
No, my ambitions
PhD?
for going for a PhD were to go and continue consulting. Because that's what I was doing at the time.
Sure.
But get a PhD and become an expert in your field and, join the ranks of global consultants.
As we come to the end of the podcast, I have to ask you if you could just give 3 pieces of advice to the students at Masters Union. And I'll break it down for you.
Okay.
An advice for them for the next 10 months while they're here, and advice for them for when they get out of Masters Union and start their corporate journey in some of their cases, or just getting back into the scheme of things with their jobs for the next 2 years upon leaving the school, and an advice for them 10, 15 years into the future. And this could be a personal or a professional advice. Just 3 pieces of advice. What would you share?
Okay, this is what I'm going to be known by, right?
Yeah.
So while you're in school, next 10 months, let's say, is your opportunity, students, to get to know yourself. The focus is now on you. Professors focused on you, schools focused on you. It's all about you. Learn who you are, what you're good at, what you like, what drives you, what ticks you off, what kinds of things make sense for you, and where you think you can contribute and where you'd like to contribute your life in the world. You need to think about that now, because once you get busy in the world, nobody else is thinking about this for you. So now it's like an opportunity while you're learning. So that's why I have you make these personal maps.
Yeah.
Take time to think. You'll make a better decision 10 months from now if you take time now to think about that. So this is your opportunity. It's planning for your own future. Once you get going, experiment. Because the first few years of your job career will tell you where you're going to go. If you go back to a corporate office and sit there for 2-3 years, you're going to be stuck, or more likely going to be stuck.
Sure.
If you go do something else, and you're going to wish you tried things. I'm not sure what it is, maybe it's a different corporate job, maybe it's a change of job, change of location, change of responsibility. Maybe you want to try an entrepreneurial thing. Maybe you want to join another startup and just work with them for a few years. Whatever it is, be willing to experiment, because that's your opportunity to experiment. Once you get 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the corporate life, it's very hard, very hard. Your next exit is when you retire at 50 or 55. Assuming you made a lot of money, then those guys retire at 50, 55, and then they go off and play. So you're looking at a 25 to 55, at least a 20-year, 30-year or more span. So you have 2-3 years to experiment. That's really open and viable to you. And when you get down the road and you've kind of made some choices and figured some things out and you arrived at some places, here's my advice to you. Look back and give back, because it's the most satisfying thing to do once you've accomplished something, is go and encourage some other people, just like somebody took time to come and encourage you so that your life did better than it would have otherwise been. They made a difference in your life. You make a difference in some other people's lives, whether it's just sharing in a class, being part of a case study, being on a panel, judging some student competitions, counseling with other students, meeting with them for a social. Doesn't matter what it is. Learn how to give back, because it's the most satisfying thing you can do once you've achieved success yourself.
That was very insightful. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us for this podcast today. I'm sure the students here at Masters Union will have a lot of takeaways from this session, and even the people outside who are watching. I'm sure there are students out there who maybe want to join Masters Union at some point of time. So, this is the person who's going to be teaching them the art of managing complexities. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. It's good to be here.